Hello students and welcome to the interesting journey of Bollywood. As you are all aware, arts in India are a living example of its cultural diversity. In India, various facets of performing arts pervade our numerous festivals, bringing color, joy and a community feeling. They serve as a positive stroke in reaffirming our faith in our heritage. These facets have been responsible for sustaining the long continuities of ancient traditions. They are the link between the past and the present. Thus, it exemplifies the complex yet organic interaction of all aspects of life in a stylized, artistic and entertaining manner. Art is not seen as something apart from life, a mere ornamentation or entertainment, but as an intrinsic part of it. Under the patronage of kings and rulers, skilled artisans and entertainers were encouraged to specialize in different arts, with some specializing in just one part of a particular art. They often refined their skills to a greater level of performance and sophistication. Gradually, the classical art forms evolved, sometimes for the glory of the temple and its inhabitants, both divine and human, and sometimes for the glory of the place and its citizens, reaching their zenith around India in the 2nd CE onwards. This was under the powerful Gupta Empire, when canons of perfection were laid down in detailed treatises, the Natyashastra and the Kama Sutras, which are still followed to this day. Through the ages, rival kings vied with each other to attract the most renowned artist and performer to their court. When the classical art over time appeared to have become distinct and distant from their folk root, they were never totally alienated from them. Even today, there is a continuous mutually enriching dialogue and a symbolic relationship between the tribal and the folk form on one hand and classical art on the other. The latter continues to be ingravated by the robustness of fresh expressions of folk forms, which are bound by common mythological themes and commitment to dharma and purusharth. In India, religion, philosophy and myth cannot be divorced from their art forms. Music and dance are probably the most elemental art forms, spontaneously expressing the entire gamut of human emotions and expressions. Dance and music are tied intrinsically to ceremonies of any kind: wedding, birth, entering a new house, greeting a guest, religious procession, harvest time, welcoming a new bride, or the birth of the baby. Any or all of these are the occasions for song and dance. There are tribal belts throughout India, and although each tribe has its own distinctive music and dance, they all share a similar form of dance that reinforces the community. In most cases, men and women with linked arms execute simple leg movement in a gradually increasing tempo that builds up to the crescendo of vigor. Along the entire Himalayan range, for instance, from Kashmir to Darjeeling, folk dancers link arms and sway gracefully in undulating movements. While folk music and dance share common themes and kinetics, there is a wide variety of forms. Students, there are also several forms of dance drama or folk theatre, such as the Nautanki of Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, the Bhavai of Gujarat, the Tamasha of Maharashtra, the Bengali Jatra, the Yakshagan of Karnataka and Theyyam of Kerala, all of which narrate legends of local heroes, kings and deities. Martial art forms throughout the country have been stylized to Kosi dance forms, notable among them which are the martial dance of the northeastern hill tribes, the Lazim dances of Maharashtra, the Kalari Payat of Kerala and the highly stylized masked Chau dances of Orissa, West Bengal and Bihar. Together, these dances have formed a vast reservoir from which the classical dances have drawn sustenance. In their present format, the history of classical dances cannot be traced back to over 200 or 300 years, but they all have links with the ancient and medieval literary, sculptural, and musical traditions of India and of their particular region. They all adhere to the canons of classical dance laid down in Natyashastra, the 2nd century text ascribed to the sage Bharata, to whom it was supposedly revealed by the creator Brahma. Folk theatre and dance drama were the common roots of both classical dance and theatre, the traditions of both of which were elaborated upon Natyashastra. Thus, whether the Ras Leela, out of which was born the Wajid Ali Shah sponsored Rahas of the Bhagwa Mela Natakam of Melatur, replete with songs and dances as the narrative unfolded, or the Ankya Bhavonas of the Satras of Assam, or the Pabuji rendition of Bhats of Rajasthan, all had dance, music, and theatre weaving into one. What was it that took us away from the impermeable braiding, from the unique mixture brewed in Natyashastra? The Natyashastra was a work in progress. It was descriptive and not prescriptive. But over the centuries, things happened that took us away from the direction it pointed us to. Primarily, two things happened to make us distant from the spirit of Natyashastra, and that imbued some of the ancient and devotional performance form that served as a ritual, and with the growth of Krishna worship and offering to him in spirit of bhakti. The first of these impact was the deconstructing impact of colonization. Many scholars point to the age of Orientalists who valued traditional Indian knowledge, including artistic knowledge. In 1783, William Jones founded the Asiatic Society and did some work on music treatise, which he brought out as the essay on the musical modes of the Hindus. This established the purity of a long past tradition age that had got muddled by Persian influence and became effeminate. Gendered and communal divisions of practice communities and a rejection of the shape and state of prevalent artistic practices resulted in marginalization of certain traditional practitioners and practice traditions. Western sensibilities that grew with the onset of colonization dictated a certain kind of aesthetic that became the dominant aesthetics. This caused a deep scheme between the art that urban India valorized and those that were pushed into rural recesses. The patrons had changed, with rural zamindars often losing out to the new carpetbaggers of India. The temples were improvised with their land grants being upsurged, and they were unable to support the traditional troops that they were once supporting. Traditional artists found it hard, and challenging times loomed ahead. This new aesthetic looked down upon traditional women practitioners. The Tawaifs and the Devdasis, the professional singing and dancing women of India, lost their regular patrons. These were those patrons who did not only look upon them as women to fulfill their carnal desires with, but who appreciated her traditional poetic, musical, and literary knowledge. In the new dispensation, there were few who appreciated or even understood her skills in language, music, or dance. She was reduced to a commercial sex worker, collectively described as Ramjani or Ram Johnny. This was the fate of the traditional artist who could sing, dance, recite, and converse unless they adopted Western ways. For instance, some of them became part of the modern theatre movement that originated in Bengal. Nati Vinodini is a wonderful example of one such performer. Modern technologies like the newly developed recording industry or film technologies drew many traditional performers, giving them a chance to reinvent themselves. Gohar Jan is an example of a Tawaif adopting modern technology to reinvent herself. This also accounts for why, in the initial years of films in India, so many of the traditional performers become actresses. Thus, from beginnings in which the English were orientalized, governance moved to the position of anglicizing the native. Macaulay's Minute of 1835 went a long way to strengthen this. It also successfully divorced the Indians from their cultural and performance heritage to a large extent. Worse, by suggesting the superiority of Western culture over Indian, the colonial masters rejected the age-old traditional performers that survived centuries, possibly because of their association with religion and ritual that were less encouraging of changes. These traditional performing forms were a rich and cohesive mix of multiple arts. The rejection of these old art forms by even those Indians who were engaged actively with the British resulted in the traditional formats of art disintegrating. Once the gut spilled open, each group claiming different expertise, attempting to recast livelihoods through their unique talents in a manner suitable for the new aesthetic and dynamics, or give up all pretenses of living off the art and began living off their bodies instead. Author and scholar Margaret Walker states in her book India's Kathak Dance in Historical Perspective that this discriminatory view of the past and present affected many areas of both political and academic discourse, lasting beyond colonial rule and shaping perceptions of the past and present Indian culture. This brings us to the issues raised at the first National Drama Seminar organized by Sangeet Natak Academy in April 1956, being the first effort to imagine and institute a national theatre for the nation's post-colonial future and signaling the nation's arrival into modernity. This seminar was the second in a series of 4 that the Sangeet Natak Academy organized, deeming them critical activities 1955, films 1956, drama 1957, music 1958, and dance. And even before mentioning the stated purpose of drama seminar, it is important to notice that by arranging different seminars for different arts, the Sangeet Natak Academy, the National Council for the Art, was taking a stand that the interrelatedness of the arts where drama, music and dance for centuries had walked hand in hand was to find no place in modern India and was to be split. The seminar on films could have been separated because films were a recent entrant into arts, but drama, music and dance had since time immemorial lived not just harmoniously together but seamlessly as well. In fact, Dr. Radhakrishnan had announced at the inauguration of the seminar that drama in India was uniquely Indian art that has been preserved for a long time. He added that its root lay in the ancient Natyashastra, while film was only of recent origin. The drama seminar's principal concern was the de-alienation of the future Indian drama. Seminar chairman Sachin Sengupta hoped to answer from the deliberations the academic chairman Dr. P.V. Rajamna's question of what future Indian drama should be like. It would appear from these words that with scant thought for what had been the prevailing pattern, this moment in the history of new nation was allowing us to cast the model afresh. To help achieve this end, the line up that the Academy had chosen to speak for the long tradition of drama were all representative of modern India, amateur practitioners, actors, directors, critics, ideologues, university professors, and scholars of drama. Sanskrit drama, regional language drama, certain themes, including the plays of Rabindranath Tagore, found representation, but not Parsi theatre and Ipta plays. Both were dismissed for being inauthentic, not purely Indian, and had eclectic influences. The utopia of national theatre that they sought to identify embodied the idea of authenticity through its investment in classical idiom. While the clamour for classicism was a very strong and desirable clamour, it was a clamour for the fixed which asserted that the soul of India remained constant. Before this, the spontaneity of the indigenous theatre forms, often working on oral text open to deletions, additions, and extrapolations, was almost disturbing. Further, the classical seemed to be valorized for its pan-India appeal, while the indigenous appeared only to have local relevance. This pandering to nostalgia was allowing the nation to be determined, as historian Ranjit Guha and Parth Chatterjee have shown, by the new elite and middle classes that carried with it a heavy intellectual colonial baggage laden on them by Macaulay's Minute of 1836. Therefore, it didn't take long for the classical to prevail. This was established by provincializing the regional and the vernacular form as being derivative of the classical Sanskrit origin and hence inferior to it. While most regional theatre lost out to the power of the classical template sanctioned by this elite, Bengali theatre, for its alignment of the project of nationalism and religious reform that spelled modernity, enjoyed some signification. But apart from that, as scholar Anita Cherian points out in her article, Imagining a National Theatre, that came out in the Sangeet Natak Academy Journal in 2007, folk form which used song, dance and drama like Nautanki, Tamasha and Bhavai were being squeezed out of urban centres. One of the reasons of this squeezing out in the case of Bhavai was explained by Dina Gandhi as being caused by the fact that vulgar interpolations in the oral text of the Bhavai had occurred. But she also located in her paper the fact that its musicality was well within classical realms, with Dhrupad, Khayal and Thumri singing finding pride of place in it, along with the directives of Natyashastra. Dina Gandhi took the trouble to explain that despite foreign rule, lived on and grew even in revolt and survived even it was affected by alien influence. This longevity she attributed to deep roots of the form. Also, let me mention here that even Parsi theatre that carried the brand of one of the most progressive communities of India was ignored by the drama seminar, possibly because it was an urban folk form that used song, dance, dialogue in a polyglot manner, multiple literatures and even magic. Drama scholar and renowned theatre director Anuradha Kapoor and Catherine Hansen, whose work on the Nautanki and Parsi theatre is defining, referred to the unabashed pursuit of popular. Later, cinema and films in India were to adapt the same attitude and means. Nataraj Ramakrishnan, whose later work to review many forgotten performance forms from Andhra Pradesh, presented a paper on Kuchipudi Bhagavatam at this seminar, in which he reinforced the fact that the temple is the cradle of Hindu civilization. He picked out elements like Vidhi Natakam, performed by Brahmin Pandits of Kuchipudi, to try and establish the classical connect. This unitary reference to the valorized classicism resulted in discursive slotting of traditions and a constant attempt for them to try and upgrade themselves to the pure classical status, even if it meant losing. This is well represented in the story of Kuchipudi. Kuchipudi Bhagavatam's history traverses between the 7th to the 16th century from a tribal form called Kurvanji, practiced by the Kuravas and the Chenchus, to the social and secular form of Yakshagan, practiced by the Yakshas or Jakula communities, to the religious and the sacred performance of Bhagavatam, which was performed by Kuchipudi's Brahmin males. In the recasting from Yakshagana to Bhagavat, many principles of Natyashastra were employed, and rich operatic traditions grew in popularity with the Vijayanagaram and Nayaka rulers of Tanjavur. But modern India dismissed it as a provincial form following colonial policies. Eventually, Kuchipudi, created by merely garnering the dance numbers from a richer tradition devoid of its theatrical element, made it into the classical dance category, a feat which was hailed as a great win for regional chauvinism. To get back to Nataraj Ramkrishna's paper at this seminar, he claimed that as the Yakshagana model was reconceived as Bhagavatam, many elements of the Natyashastra were incorporated in it. According to him, this included the enhancing of the narrative and the characterization through song and 4 types of abhinaya, as well as a dazzling moments of pure dance on nritya. By this argument, Ramkrishnan was making a point that Geet, Abhinay, Nritya and Nritya was all part of Natyashastra and hence sanctioned by this great classical text. Dear students, while Kuchipudi Bhagavatam did not make the classical cut then, what must be appreciated was the nuanced argument that Ramkrishnan was forwarding. While other traditional and folk dance drama forms were being dismissed as the degenerate version of classical, the argument for Kuchipudi Bhagavatam went in the reverse to suggest how a folk form was upgraded to a classical one. Even with respect to the Devadasis, who by then has been stigmatized for almost 80 years, he argued that those associated with the temples in Telugu-speaking region danced a dance which was pure as it had been born in the temple, remained unchanged, and was executed in such a perfect manner that the divine forms could be seen in it. Only in the end did he mention the dire state the practicing communities were in and how the art was in desperate need of support. Despite this impassioned plea, even Kuchipudi dance took a while to enter the classical pantheon. Thus, we see with the separation of dance element from the traditional folk dance drama tradition, suddenly classical elements can be discerned. It is in effect a continuity of tradition where dance and drama has travelled together at the time on their own, at times supportive, at times complementing and enhancing. The subsequent history of dance and theatre-oriented theatre in India reveals how eminent cultural activists such as Rukmini Devi, Sumitra Charatram, Charles Fabry, Dina Gandhi, Kapila Vatsyayan, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, Uday Shankar and several others share a narrative of serendipity discovering languages forms, both classical and folk, or folk aspiring for the classical. This was followed by a search for its traditional gurus, who were then invited to modern institutions in metropolitan centers to take master classes and train dancers. The case of Chow at Sri Ram Bharatiya Kala Kendra, Delhi, subscribed to this template. This would be followed by a triumphant performance, grants sought for further work and productions, and eventually the metropolitan dancers would become the voice and authority on the style, while in the rural center, other artists of the form would continue to languish. It strikes one to ask the question, why the delay? These forms could have been given the primary and position by the modern nation state, as they were discovered through many censuses, of the nation without pushing them to the brink of extinction, unless the plan of a new patron of arts always was to write these art of their connections to their hereditary and morally unregulated antecedents. Probably the most successful project of moral and aesthetic reform was the transformation of Sadir to Bharatnatyam. While in the performing arts, where music and dance or theatre were undergoing a sort of moral cleansing, there was one art form, a young art form, that was absorbing the many features that were being thrown out in the process of sanitization. This was film, which was using the fluidity of the language, the spontaneity of humor, the attractiveness of music, the draw of dance, and several other creative features to stake a hold on the national imagination. For several centuries, this power was at the command of the dance and drama traditions. But due to the national process and adoption of modernity, this power was lost to dance and theatre, and film became the cohesive pan-India glue. Students, I hope you've enjoyed your Bollywood journey, and we look forward to continue with other topics as well.